This is Brighter Rays, and today we're looking at the conclusion of our study called God Granted Me Success. We've been studying Genesis chapter 27, 1 through 29. And today we're just going to talk about a few things I want to point out to you about this section here, this story. Now, I want to start with 1 Timothy 1:9. Take a look at that. It talks about how God saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because our works, but because of His own purpose and grace, which He gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. Think about that. That's what happened with Jacob. That's what happened. Jacob was called to a holy calling, not because of his works, because his works, especially here, are evil, but because of God's own purpose, His grace, His unmerited favor that He hands out, which He gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. He gave that holy calling, and His grace and His purposes were set in Christ Jesus for Jacob before the ages began. And it would unfold in his life before his eyes. The same thing for us. We're not saved because of our works. And it says right there, He called us to a holy calling, not because of our works, not because of what we do, but because of His own purpose and grace. God has a purpose, which is not our actions, not our works are His purpose. He has a separate purpose. Now He can use our works, but He doesn't have to. Sometimes He does, sometimes He uses the things we do, sometimes He overrides the things we do. Sometimes He stops us from doing things we're doing so that we can do the right things. Sometimes He does that. So He does it all different kinds of ways. But it always has to do with His purpose and His grace. His grace, He's bestowing grace upon people. And He will do that. Because, guess what? The plan was set before the ages began. That's what it says. It gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. Before anything began, before time began, this plan was already set. So how are you going to thwart that? How are you going to fight that? You can't do it. So, let me read you a quote from George MyIne. I think that's how you say his name. Sorry, George, I don't know how you pronounce your last name. MyIne? I don't know. It's M-Y-I-N-E. But it has a capital I, so it's like Scottish or English. I don't know. Anyway, George reminds us that this is to humble you, he says, as well as to exalt you. He's talking about 1 Timothy here. This is to make you weep as well as cause you to rejoice. You are vile in yourself, but chosen to indescribable honor. You're chosen to indescribable honor. You are poor in yourself, but chosen to unspeakable riches. You're naked in yourself, but chosen to eternal glory. Remember that Jacob was not blessed because he was a man of God, right? Jacob was not blessed because he was this great man of God. There really are no great men of God. They're all weak and sinners. Jacob became a man of God because he was blessed by God. That's what changed him. It's not because he made himself a man of God. It's not because of the choices that he made. It's not because he decided somewhere along the line to follow God. So God changed him. The blessing of God and His grace and His mercy on him is what made him a man of God. It's the same for us. It's the same for all people. We need to remember this truth. Paul reminded Timothy of this fact while Paul was suffering for preaching the gospel. He did not want Timothy to become ashamed of the man who he was following. Paul said he was not ashamed of his suffering because he knew who he believed, and he was convinced that Jesus was able to guard what was entrusted to him. See, Paul didn't have any doubts of, I'm suffering, but don't be ashamed of me. Don't be ashamed of me. Don't be ashamed of what's happening to to me. Because God is able to do what He's going to do. He's given me this gospel, and this gospel will succeed whether I succeed or not. So we need to remember those truths. May we know those same truths and have that same conviction that God will succeed. God will win. If I sin, God will win. If I do exactly what I'm supposed